Hello and welcome back to my VBA and Excel training channel. Today's video I'm going to show you two different ways on how to find your used range. In other words, where does your data end so you know where to provide a reference point to accumulating other data. So in this case I have this row. If I want to add more data on here automatically, then I'm going to need to know exactly where that starting point is and where the ending point is for the existing data. So our target data, this is just generic information, is going to be this range. So how do I get VBA to automatically select that range on my behalf so I can do something with it? So let's get started. And for your information, cell A1, I have data as a reference point. It's my named range. It's completely optional. If you don't use that, then you'll just need to use A1 as your reference point. So for visually, in this demonstration purposes, I'm going to move this data over to here so you can see what it does. And then we'll modify it a little bit and you can see how those changes impact the code. So we'll start with method number 1 of 2. We've inserted a module and given it a name, and here's method number 1. We have x, and that's going to be equal to sheets.usedRange.rows.count. So that's literally going to count the number of used range or used rows in that range and assign x a value. Once it finds x, then it's going to select the range that I've assigned, which is essentially a fixed range plus a variable. So A2 all the way to C and whatever x ends up being equal to. So if we flip back over real quick, we have A2 as our starting point. It's going over to C, and then as it counts those used rows, x is going to be equal to 11. And then it should find our range as highlighted right there. Once it finds that range, it's going to copy it. Then it's going to select another specific range that I've called out here. Very similar to the one up there. X is our variable, so it'll select the same number of rows, except it's going to select different number of columns. So F2 to H X. So F2 to H, whatever x is equal to, we should see it paste exactly in that space. So the next line shows a paste function, and then after that a couple of optional coding, if you will. You don't need to include that. And then this is also optional, but just confirms that the macro is completed. And it's going to pop up a message box saying that it's been copied and pasted. So let's go ahead and click on it and see what it does. I'll click on the button Run. There it is. You can see the data's been transferred over. We've been given our message box to confirm that the action's been completed. We'll click OK, and that's done. So obviously pretty simple. But you can take that concept and expand on it and get creative. But before we end this video, I do want to show you method number 2 because I like it better. It's going to give us the same results, but I think in certain scenarios it's actually going to give us more accurate results. So I've already written the code. I'm just going to copy and paste it. And this was method number 1 right here. I'm going to replace that right there. I'm going to make that green, which means it will be bypassed during the code execution or the macro execution. So the difference here is we're assigning x a value. We're going to do a very simple do loop. So do until range data, and here's that reference point I was talking about earlier, dot offset x comma 0. So x is going to be our row, 0 is our column, and we're going to do that loop until column 0 is essentially equal to blank. And as part of that loop, we're going to increase the x value by 1 until we reach that blank. So what does that mean? I'm going to hop over here. X is equal to 1, column 0. We're in the based on this reference point of data. In other words, if data was a reference point over here, then this would be column 0. If data was over here, this would be column 0. So the data reference point is driving our coordinates. So if we go back, we're going to have x create a value until it gets to blank, which would be right here. So x will then be equal to 11 because the loop will end once it gets to here prior to the increase of the x value, if that makes sense. So going back over to the code, we're going to execute this. All the stuff remains the same. It's actually going to give us the same result, but I'm going to show you in a second the key difference between the two. So here we hit run, exact same result as expected. Now here's the difference. If I have data down here, I'm just going to copy that and show you. The difference between the two codes is the method 1 is going to count the number of used rows. It's actually going to include this information. The do loop will stop because row 12 is going to run into a blank row. So keeping it the same on method 2, as expected, it stopped once this was blank and it only copied that information. So let's get rid of that. Now let's switch it back to our first method, and we will skip over that method number 2. Now we'll see what happens. Now look, got us a different result. Even though it's very similar coding, it's once you throw in blank rows, it's actually going to just be treated a little bit differently. So I'm going to show you a different way to look at this. So we're going to get rid of that, and now if you look at the number of rows, there's 11. If you do a space, which you can't see, space, space, then even though you can't see any information in there, there's a space, but it's going to pick it up as part of this used rows. So I'm going to actually stop the macro here. I'm going to execute it. It's been executed up until this point, and if you notice, x is equal to 15 now. And like I said, x was equal to 11, but as I entered those spaces in here, x is now equal to 15. So having spaces in there can be a little bit difficult to predict your results because it may throw off some things. And in order to get it back to where it was, you can come in and delete those rows. You've deleted those spaces. You've essentially deleted some potentially used rows or within that range that this formula may be counting. So after those are deleted, I'm going to re-execute the macro. This should now say 11, which it does, and we're back to where we want. So I wanted to show you those two different methods giving you essentially the same results, but when you introduce blank rows or data that's maybe out here somewhere that you can't see, your results may actually be different. So depending on your situation, take into consideration which method you want to use. Sometimes you might want one method, sometimes you might want the other method. So again, here's method 1. VBA is going to count the used range. Here's method 2, where you're just running a do loop through the data until you get to a blank cell. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was beneficial, and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more useful VBA videos. And I will see you next time. Thanks.